This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on Election Commission guidelines during Corona pandemic for conduct of elections. The participants are Ashok Tandon, political analyst, and AIR correspondent Renu Kataria.
Sir, the Election Commission has issued guidelines for elections amid COVID-19. What does it mean for the parties and candidates?
There was a demand from some of the parties in Bihar to postpone the elections in view of coronavirus, but finally the Election Commission has put its foot down and announced the timely conduct of elections to the 243-member Legislative Assembly of Bihar. Before announcing the guidelines, the Election Commission had sought views and suggestions from all political parties and other stakeholders, even the civil society, and after considering all the suggestions, the Election Commission has finally announced the guidelines. And one thing which is important is that this is not for the first time that the Election Commission would be holding poll during the corona pandemic. In fact, after a few months of postponement, the Election Commission had successfully conducted the Rajya Sabha and Legislative Council elections in various states under strict COVID-specific guidelines. So therefore, it will not be very out of place to say that why elections have been announced. But the fact remains that the guidelines are quite strict. So the adherence to the guidelines will be the responsibility of not only the Election Commission but also of the state machinery. So the machinery will have to be geared up, and therefore we do hope that the guidelines would be followed. And one thing which is quite interesting is that since the pandemic has broken out in different parts of the world, 34 countries have conducted elections to their assemblies and presidential elections, etc. So it's not that India or perhaps Bihar will be the first state to hold elections. South Korea has done remarkably well. Even our neighbor Sri Lanka has also conducted successful elections. So I think we should think positive about it. Therefore, go ahead with these elections, and quite well in advance the guidelines have been issued. So I do hope that all political parties will strictly adhere to the guidelines and also launch campaign within the limits which are now being given by the Election Commission.
Sir, we also know that Bihar will also be the first state where assembly elections will be held amid the pandemic. So what will be the challenges for the Election Commission?
There are huge challenges for the Election Commission also. In fact, it's a very bold step which Election Commission has taken, considering all aspects, especially holding election in a state like Bihar, which is quite notorious. In the past, there were ballot boxes, there used to be rigging, ballot boxes used to be looted, etc. And therefore, the challenge is quite enormous. But I think with the help of the state machinery and all the law enforcing agencies which will be available to the Election Commission from the central forces also, and they have yet to announce the schedule, in the sense that last time Bihar elections were held in 5 phases. Whether the elections are held again in 5 phases is yet to be known, because under the new guidelines, the number of polling booths will have to be more, and not more than 1,000 electorate would be casting their vote in one polling booth. So Election Commission, with the help of the state government and state machinery and law enforcing agencies, I do hope will be able to cope with this challenge. And otherwise, providing the EVMs, etc., and all places, all these challenges were there earlier also. But now, because of certain SOPs like social distancing, other precautions like sanitization, and all voters will have to be provided with gloves, which is a huge challenge. And then everybody will have to be with masks. And only when there is identification time, mask will be allowed to be removed for a few seconds. Otherwise, disposable gloves will be provided. There will be sanitation, and sanitization arrangement will have to be made at each and every polling booth. So all these things, only Election Commission can provide guidelines, but the state machinery I think will face a greater challenge, and law enforcing agencies also, rather than the Election Commission. So I think with the consent of the Bihar government, Election Commission is going ahead, and you very rightly said, Bihar will be the first state, and if they can set an example, then in the following months there is going to be election in West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, and some other states also, because we don't know how long the pandemic is going to continue. So I think Bihar, which is in itself is a challenging state, will be setting an example for the rest of the country. And I do hope that the government of Bihar must have given its nod in favor of election, and therefore now the country and particularly Bihar and political parties will be in election mode from now.
So what are the Election Commission's plan for people who are quarantined and show symptoms of the virus on the day of the polling?
When somebody turns up at a polling booth, his temperature will be checked. And if the temperature is above normal, abnormal, then he will be given a token, and he or she would be asked to come only at the last hour of the polling, and they will be asked to go back, because they will not be allowed to cast the vote as and when they come to the polling booth, because their temperature is not normal. So last hour of the polling in all the polling booths would be actually specially kept earmarked for people who are asymptomatic, in the sense their temperature is not normal, and people who are already suffering from COVID. They will also be allowed to cast their vote, but not regular way. They will have to come at the last 1 hour with all SOPs, all precautions, including the PPE kits, etc., and with the help of the health workers. So it will be a huge challenge to mobilize people who are positive. And some of them, even if they are having quarantine at home, they will also have to follow the SOPs. And people coming from hospital also will have to follow the SOPs, but nobody will be denied his right to cast a vote. And that way, the arrangements would be such that, of course, apart from maintaining social distancing, sanitizers, gloves, but there will be no huge queues. Maximum number at a polling booth would be 1,000, and that too would be staggered. And I think that even on the counting day, the number of counting tables would be much less with all the precautions. So counting and holding elections would be the responsibility of the Election Commission and the State Election Commission also. But I think they will be able to make all the foolproof arrangements. Now, coming to the arrangements to be made by the state government, they will have to provide such polling booths where there is fresh air and people can easily come and cast their vote, because there will be no vehicles allowed. So with all these precautions, I do hope that the election will be held in a peaceful manner.
So are there any separate set of guidelines for voters residing in the containment zones?
No separate guidelines. The only guideline is they would be brought to the polling booth, allowed to come to the polling booth with the help of the health workers only in the last 1 hour of polling. So that by the time all those who are having normal health, they have already cast their vote and they have gone home. So therefore, all those who are eligible, whether they are corona positive or whether they are in cantonment zone, they will all be allowed to cast their vote. So this is basically to dispel the apprehensions that in view of the pandemic there will be a poor turnout, and I think state government as well as the Election Commission undertake all the publicity measures to encourage people to come out with all the precautions. So therefore all the facilities etc. would be available, and when we talk of the campaign, we can discuss how the campaign will be geared up.
Are there any guidelines for virtual rallies and digital campaigns?
No, I'm afraid the Election Commission guidelines are silent about virtual rallies and the digital campaign. That will be entirely up to the political parties. They would be allowed to do this campaign. But because there have been apprehensions about the level playing field, because some smaller political parties perhaps cannot afford the digital campaign or virtual rallies, so the Election Commission may be a one-time exception, allow all the traditional methods of campaigning which were used earlier prior to the strict guidelines enforced by election, like wall writing, while posters, and all these things would be allowed. But as far as the candidates are concerned, the guidelines are for all political parties the same, and they are quite strict. and the candidate will not be allowed to have more than 2 people accompanying him, and door-to-door campaign, not more than 5 workers of any political party can roam around for door-to-door campaign, and therefore there will be some relaxations, but strict guidelines will have to be adhered to. And because, as we all know, Bihar is still in the midst of COVID-19 outbreak and elections are to be held, so therefore there are certain other restrictions also in terms of campaign. But there will be no guideline as such whether the political parties can hold virtual rallies or invoke digital campaigning. But no physical public meeting will be allowed. So door-to-door campaign will be allowed, candidates will be allowed, but with the restrictions. So that may be the mode of campaigning.
Sir, you were talking about fresh air and social distancing during the polls a few minutes back. So coming to that, the Election Commission has also said that each station will have up to 1,000 voters, down from the earlier norm of 1,500 voters to a polling station. So is there a plan as to which areas in the state will be designated as polling booths for effective maintenance of social distancing?
Generally, the schools are polling stations, and schools incidentally are quite well spread in India, even in rural areas and elsewhere in Bihar. So if now the only thing is that the more schools will have to be commissioned now, and therefore more people also conducting the election. So the state government will have to provide adequate number of polling booths well spread out, and as well as the machinery to conduct the elections. And I think Bihar government is prepared for it, and so we do hope that with all the guidelines and SOPs, the Bihar will be the first state to conduct free and fair elections, and because the elections are due sometime in October and November, last date of the Bihar Assembly. So before that, the elections will be held. If they are held in 5 phases, again then the process may start somewhere in October. But I think now with guidelines out, the political parties now will set in motion the process of electioneering and also their campaign strategies considering the guidelines and the other SOPs.
How will the training of election officials be organized amid the pandemic?
In the past also, in regular election, the Election Commission and the state election machinery also had been organizing training camps for the people who are on duty. But this time, in view of the pandemic and the SOPs, the training also will be slightly different. But how to conduct training will also be very challenging thing. Maybe the training part is done on virtual training camps, like video conferencing, because you can't organize training camps of the people who will be on duty. So I think the training process will start very soon, and it may be through virtual video conferencing, and also the guidelines may be issued from time to time, and all the SOPs will also be distributed to them. The selection of the election conducting machinery will have to be done well in advance so that they can be trained, and also transporting the election machinery to the polling booth will also be a huge challenge, because you can't have so many transport arrangements, because there again social distancing will have to be maintained. Earlier the conducting officers or the polling in charge used to camp overnight at their polling booths. Now it may not be possible this time. And how to reach far-flung areas. All these challenges, I think, will be enormous, and I think the whole world would be watching, particularly the rest of India would be watching how elections are conducted in Bihar, because very soon we will see elections coming up in some other states as well. So it is a challenge, but at the same time, an opportunity for the Election Commission to prove its worth. The Election Commission can come out victorious in conducting this election, and that too in a very, very sensitive state like Bihar. I think that you never know, there may be requests from so many other countries for the Indian Election Commission to go and conduct elections there.
With this note, we would like to thank you.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on Election Commission guidelines during Corona pandemic for conduct of elections. The participants were Ashok Tandon, political analyst, and AIR correspondent Renu Kataria. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com, You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.